Welcome to Locality 2020 unConvention, the annual general gathering of people who believe in the power of community. It's going to be different, but I hope so that we'll all have the opportunity to energise, infuse, support, share, motivate one another for what's going to be a challenging period ahead. Let's admit it, 2020 is a year that none of us are going to forget, even if it is for the wrong reasons. Let's also remember it's a year where organisations like ours have demonstrated their true worth across the country. I've been humbled and bowled over by the mobilisation of the sector, reinforcing the resilience of this nation, ensuring that our communities protect the most vulnerable, irrespective of the pandemic and the infodemic crisis that we have faced. But what a hopeful week. This week I can begin to regain a sense of optimism. President-elect Joe Biden, more importantly, I think Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who's significant, makes history as the first woman of colour elected to the US Vice President. We also have the first of a few vaccines that have proven to be effective. And I suspect by this time next year, we could potentially consider meeting once again in person. There's no doubt that we as a sector are built for this. Let's spend the next few days recharging and begin the task of reshaping our communities, responding and ensuring to our public services and ensuring that they're held accountable to our communities more effectively. Ultimately, let's strengthen our resolve not to allow current allowances to disintegrate into historical silos. So once again, welcome. And this is the opportunity now to hand over to our Chief Executive, Tony Armstrong.
Thank you, Mark, for that great introduction, and also for all your hard work and dedication over the last few years as chair of Locality. For those who don't know, Mark will be standing down, retiring from the board tomorrow. So do come to the AGM first thing tomorrow, where we'll give him a good send-off. So welcome from me to everybody to our most unconventional convention. I'm delighted to be with you today in spirit, even though not physically. Looking back, I think last year when we were all in Leeds together for our last in-person convention, who would have thought, I would never have imagined that for the next year's one, I'd be welcoming you into my back bedroom. But here we are, so welcome to my back bedroom. It's been obviously a very difficult year, as Mark has just said. It seems to have both gone in a complete blur, a complete flash, but it also seems about, I don't know, 25 years ago since we were all in Leeds together, a really strange year. So looking back to March this year, that's when the world basically turned upside down. So Locality members were hit hard and hit suddenly. You were all trying to keep services going, supporting local people as much as possible as the whole world changed around us. We had to move from our main model of bringing people together physically to keeping people apart. Centres and community centres and buildings had to close to the public, but the work went on. Vitally, we kept people connected and supported during the lockdown and throughout the crisis of the last few months. Locality members acted as distribution centres for food, for medicines, providing a lifeline to vulnerable people who are isolated, making sure they felt connected to their local community, supporting families to get through lockdown, which was really difficult, helping vulnerable people to still access the vital services they needed, coordinating volunteers, working in partnership with local councils, local businesses to bring people together virtually, if not physically. The pandemic has had obviously a disproportionate impact on poorer communities, which is where most of our members operate. The phrase that was uttered at the time in spring, that the virus doesn't discriminate, was shown to be laughable. It also failed to recognise the deep structural inequalities that exacerbated the impact of the pandemic on many of our communities, particularly on Black, Asian and other minority ethnic communities. And the economic impact of the virus has been far more keenly felt in the most disadvantaged communities, bringing real hardship and pain, something which is going to take a long time for us to recover from. But despite all these challenges, we've seen something incredible happen over the last few months. Alongside our NHS and care workers, community organisations working at a local level have been on the front line in responding to the crisis. As you all know, local community organisations were already a vital part of our social infrastructure across the country, helping local people to succeed and thrive, supporting the local economy, building stronger neighbourhoods and communities. Because of the deep commitment, local connections, partnerships and relationships built over many years, local community organisations were able to respond quickly, creatively to keeping communities together and supporting local people. And as one of our members said, over the spring and summer, when we were talking to everybody about the impact of the crisis, we were built for this. That's why we exist. And that's why this is the theme of this session, the opening session of unConvention. That connection, that local knowledge, the partnerships, relationships, and the commitment to place all made a difference during the crisis. You may have just watched one of the virtual visits to St Paul's Carnival in Bristol. And if you haven't, I definitely recommend watching that and the other two amazing films from Centre 4 in Grimsby, where I come from, and also Glendale Gateway Trust in Wooler. They're brilliant films that really capture the essence of what we talk about when we say the power of community. So in one of those films, Latoya from St Paul's absolutely nailed it when she said that community organisations were the most nimble and the most fleet of foot of organisations, are able to adapt and respond quickly. And we've seen that time and time again over the last few months. I'm sure we've all had long conversations about systems change. We've had long conversations about moving to a digital strategy. In the heat of the crisis, it just happened. We just got on with it and did what we had to do to support local people. I think the other thing I found from talking to members is a newfound respect and a new power balance between community organisations and local authorities, with senior local authority officers and councillors really understanding and appreciating the professionalism and the agility of community organisations in providing services. We also saw an amazing outpouring of community spirit and neighbourliness across the country, with people stepping up, helping each other, looking out for each other. So some real amazing achievements in a period of huge challenges. So where are we now? Well, the financial impact of the crisis on community organisations has obviously been really severe. Locality members we know have struggled to generate income with lack of access to the buildings and facilities that they have. And we've all recognised that this isn't a short, sharp shock, but this is going to continue. We're obviously already in a second lockdown. The challenges are going to continue on an economic and financial basis for some time to come. I'm really proud of what we've done at Locality to help you. During this year, we've managed to support hundreds of organisations with advice, with information, with moral support, with practical help. And we've also played a leading role in terms of our lobbying work to try and get government to come up with financial support and to work with funders to make funding available during the emergency. I'm particularly pleased that we've worked with our key partners, Power to Change and the National Lottery Community Fund, to make sure that there's been emergency funding which is directed at local community organisations. And I know that many of our members have benefited from that emergency funding, which has really helped out. As Mark said, we've had good news this week, potentially, with the potential vaccine. It's really exciting, and it kind of, fingers crossed, gives us the sense that there's light at the end of the tunnel. As well as continuing to support members day to day through this crisis, of course, we continue to do that. But we've also been doing a lot of thinking about how to recover in the long term. We want to make sure that the new normal, when we come out of this, doesn't look like the old normal. So we're focusing on three key areas that we want to see change at a national level. And we need the government to play its part in recognising and supporting the amazing work that local community organisations do. So firstly, economic recovery is going to be a hard slog. We need to learn the lessons from the future, from the failure of economic policy over the last several decades. And we want to support a truly community-powered economic recovery, trusting local people and organisations to play a leading role in their local economies and giving them the tools and funding to do what they do. We've got to move away from competition in our public services. We've seen some great collaboration and partnerships through this crisis between community organisations and local authorities. We need to build on that. We need to see collaboration be the centrepiece of how we design and deliver public services with local people in the lead. And we've got to decentralise decision-making. How many more examples have we seen over the last few months of national centralised programmes failing, when we've seen such agility, such amazing work at a local level using existing structures, existing organisations and existing partnerships? We need to make sure that the decisions are more focused at a local and neighbourhood level so that people can have a say over decisions which affect their lives. So through the challenges we've all lived through over the last recent months, we've also seen a glimpse of a better future. We need to work hard to make sure that we really do build back better. It's not just a slogan. It's going to be tough, but this network is really tough. We've shown time and time again the true power of community, and we're going to keep doing it together for the long haul. So it's fantastic that we're able to be together virtually, even if it's a bit sad that we're not all together. I hope that we can still give you the same benefits that we always manage to achieve through convention in this unconventional convention. So we want you to be motivated, inspired, and to connect with each other. We've got over 600 people taking part over the next 2 days, and I do encourage you to make the best of it. If you've been to a convention before, you know that I always like to encourage you to mingle, mingle, mingle. For those who find it a little bit embarrassing or difficult to walk into a room and start talking to people you don't know, well, for those people, this is your year. You don't have to do that. So we've got a really good system on the platform for you to network with other participants at unConvention. So I encourage you to connect with people, talk to people you don't know, and reconnect with people that you've already met. And some of you will know that we always like you to do some heavy lifting at the beginning of convention. We usually do some kind of stunt to try and get us active on social media. So this year is no different, just because we're apart. So we asked you to prepare a pen and paper, good old fashioned tools. And what we want you to do is we want you to write down where you are right now, because we can't be together, so we want to see where we all are. What we want to do, write that down where you are, and then take a selfie of yourself with the paper in front of you. And then what we want you to do is tweet a picture of your selfie, and let us know in the tweets who you wish you were sitting next to at convention. So use the hashtag Locality20, and I'm just about to tweet my own, which I prepared earlier. So all encourage you to do it. Here it is. So let's see how many impressions we can make across social media. So do take your selfies and tweet them over the course of the next few minutes. So it's a huge undertaking to put this event on. I'd like to thank everybody involved, all of our speakers, everyone participating in workshops, visits, etc. A special thank you to our amazing Locality staff team who've worked so hard to put it all on. I just hope that you have fun, and I hope we manage to create some atmosphere. I always think of Locality convention as being a bit like a family reunion. So hopefully we managed to create that. We also couldn't put on this event without the generous support of our sponsors and supporters. So our special thanks go to our headline supporter, Power to Change, and our other supporters, Virgin Money Foundation, the National Lottery Community Fund, and our sponsors, NatWest, Ensley, Anthony Collins, Good Finance, Charity Bank, and Wrigley's. So I encourage you to get the most out of the next couple of days. Play around on the platform, look at the menu somewhere. I'm pointing. I can't remember which side I'm supposed to be pointing at, but you'll see the menu. Have a play around and see what functionality there is on the platform. Check out your agenda along the side. That's how you access all of the different events. All of the links to the specific workshops and plenary sessions are found there. take a virtual stroll through our sponsor and supporter area and check out what's going on. If you need help with anything, there's a button saying need help. Just click on that and that will take you to a source of help if you've got any technical problems or any questions about the agenda. And you can also say hello to the Locality staff at our virtual Locality stand as well. One of the things we want to encourage is interactivity. So there's a social wall, so do post on that and talk about what you're experiencing, who you've connected with. And also, you know the saying, points make prizes. Well, we've got a bit of gaming going on across the next 2 days. So you can generate points, you can take part in live polls, and you can win a prize at the end of it. So do check out all the different things on the platform that you can do. Also, a big plug, please do join us for the celebration event this afternoon. It's an important point, I think, for us to celebrate all the amazing work that's gone on over the last year. We're looking forward to seeing you there with a drink in hand. Given that it's this mid-afternoon, it can be a cup of tea, or if you want, it can be something stronger, as we'll be raising a glass to all of you and the wonderful work that you do. So you'll find that in the Zoom link in the agenda. And be ready to join us at 3:10 later. So it's really important that we wanted to make convention happen virtually, even though it's been a very difficult year, and we're really pleased to be able to do that. We've been doing conventions for the last 20 years, and it offers a chance for us all to get a bit of motivation, inspiration, share stories with each other, and come out feeling refreshed and motivated for the future. So hopefully we can achieve that for you. So we've got some amazing speakers for the rest of this session. And first up is actually my old boss, Joe Montgomery. Joe is the chair of the Youth Futures Foundation, which is an independent organisation set up to tackle youth employment. So lots of connections with the work that you do. He was previously a top civil servant, which is how I know him, and he was previously the government's Director General for Places and Communities. He also led the Neighbourhood Renewal Units, which is when we worked together. Joe has pre-recorded his remarks, and I'm delighted to introduce you to him now, and I'll see you later.
Good morning, and thank you to Tony Armstrong for inviting me to help welcome you to today's convention. Tony and I have some shared history. Gosh, about 20 years ago, we both worked on something called the National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal. It was a moment in public policy when neighbourhoods, when community-based delivery was central to the way that policy and programmes were operated. It was also a moment where there was quite significant public spending on the renewal of disadvantaged neighbourhoods. Immense amounts of money, in fact. The Neighbourhood Renewal Fund, the New Deal for Communities programmes, the invention of LEPs, the creation of devolved budgets right to the front line, all amounted to a multi-billion-pound commitment to the renewal of our most disadvantaged neighbourhoods, with the main policy objective being to narrow the gap between the most disadvantaged neighbourhoods and the rest. So an immense amount of money, but what are the lessons we might draw from that to get better at the things we need to do today? Well, as always, we relied on a really powerful evaluation of the National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal by the Joseph Rowntree Fund, and Sheffield Hallam University and others. But there was always this abiding feeling that there was a danger that the money, all this money, would just wash through these communities, leave no legacy, leave no lasting positive change, and not leave enough infrastructure for contemporary communities to work with, to build on, and to continue to generate improvement through. So I was quite worried, really, when Tony asked me to pull out lessons from the National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal. And I did two things, really. I went and had a look back at current evidence through the ONS review of social capital for 2020. But then I also took a look at some of the legacy organisations that were born during the era of the National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal. And the bright sparks include these few things. Firstly, many of the New Deal for Communities areas generated community trusts. many of them exist until today. Many of them do the kinds of things that the Shoreditch Trust has done so effectively with its chief executive, Jackie Roberts, and others who were there all those years ago, but have created a long-lasting organisation built on inheriting some local assets, built on generating local revenue through letting space, through commercial operations like restaurants and other trading entities that have built up enough surpluses to allow some of the less profitable activities to be subsidised. So the Shoreditch Trust, 20 years on from its inception, is still delivering support to local people's well-being and mental health, helping local people who can't get out by themselves, creating skills training opportunities for young people who are adrift of the labour market, and generally helping to knit the local community together. So that all this renewal that took place in Shoreditch resulted in glitzy restaurants, groovy offices, and a whole range of new people coming in, but it hasn't neglected those who were there before, those who didn't quite get lifted up with the economic renewal that the local regeneration programs brought about, and also just continued to be a bridge for those who are at risk, vulnerable, who need a helping hand. And it provides a fantastic bit of infrastructure through which local volunteers can genuinely provide a helping hand to others in their neighbourhood. So I'm buoyed up by the idea that even after the big public policy programs and the big spending programs have gone, there's important infrastructure, important capability still left in the Shoreditch community that allows it to give constructive, positive help, even now in a period of the coronavirus. What are the public policy aims of the government over and above tackling the direct health challenges? Well, they want us to help tackle loneliness and isolation, help tackle the kind of mental health challenges that people have as a consequence, help tackle the youth unemployment and people just being adrift of the labour market and not knowing how to plug in properly. And they want help to just knit communities together at this time of national distress. And one of the things that ministers, senior officials in Whitehall are understanding more and more is that there isn't a lever that you can pull in Whitehall that will directly deliver all of these bits of local well-being. They are going to rely on organisations just like the Shoreditch Trust and just like your organisations in your neighbourhoods. And at this moment, when so many people are looking at the American scene and thinking about lessons to be learnt from there, I'm not particularly thinking about phrases from Donald Trump or from Joe Biden. I'm thinking much more of the words of somebody called Tip O'Neill, a congressman from Boston who was active in the 70s and 80s. And Tip O'Neill's famous phrase when he was leader of the House was, "All politics is local." And not every notion can be translated from a US context to a UK context. But actually, my strong belief is all politics is local, all service delivery at the end of the day is local, and all community care and cohesion is inevitably local. You can't build communities with a bit of legislation or a central pronouncement. Communities are built, local services are delivered on your estate, down your street, in your local place. And without your participation, your expertise, your commitment, paid and unpaid, to foster a vibrant community, provide a framework for volunteering, accept public service contracts to make sure that service delivery is done by local people, for local people, in their neighbourhood, your participation is going to be absolutely crucial. So as I looked at the lessons to be learned from the ONS survey of social capital for 2020. They talked about people's feeling of positive engagement in their neighbourhood being down. They talked about people feeling less and less as though they belonged in their local neighbourhood, and that people's participation in voluntary or recreational organisations, that has reduced as well. But there were so many positive signs. People felt that those living in their neighbourhoods were prepared to help, and people were prepared to volunteer. So with that, I say, let's draw on those positives. Let's build around the government's commitment to providing resources by helping generate the means for connecting those resources to local communities and locking in some of the benefits of that spending through the creation of long-term legacy organisations like the Shoreditch Trust, but relevant to your local circumstances, your local challenges, and the needs of your local communities. I can only close by saying to you that for all the public policy that may get announced, it's important that you step up and make the argument that community-based organisations, community trusts, and other vehicles should play a part both in shaping the policy and in executing and delivering the policy. It's crucial that you're at the table so that the Communities in Charge campaign that Locality is championing, it's very important. And I think you'll find that both officials and ministers at the centre will be more and more receptive to the idea that you can help to make this delivery work at a time when the nation is sorely challenged and at a time when the communities with the least assets are in danger of being the hardest hit by all the problems, both health and wider social problems generated by COVID. Thank you for participating today. Thank you for the work that you do in your local communities. And I give you every encouragement to stand up, make your argument to Whitehall and Westminster that you deserve a role in both shaping and delivering the successor programmes to the Towns Fund, to the ERDF programmes and the other big programmes that are about community benefit. Those programmes will only work well if you're engaged and you're involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Joe Montgomery for that message, a bit of a rallying cry. And I think he really demonstrated that power that exists in us. You know, we are a strong network. Just thinking to tomorrow's session when we're talking about politics of community power, I think some of the messages Joe was talking about there in terms of demonstrating the capability and professionalism across our network is really powerful. So we'll hear from politicians and think tank people about how we can harness that power to give ourselves a stronger voice. So our next speaker is one of our fantastic members. It's Rashid Iqbal. Rashid is the Chief Executive at The Winch in Camden in London. The Winch delivers a cradle to career network of opportunity for children and young people and seeks to effect systematic change through community and youth organising. Rashid has held senior roles at the London Early Years Foundation, the Children's Society, Refugee Action, and was a founding trustee of Transform Justice. But more importantly than all of that, he's a fantastic Locality member. I'm delighted to introduce him and hear what he has to say. Over to you, Rashid.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, conference, for having me, really. I'm Rashid. I work at The Winch, which is a London-based charity. And I'm going to talk to you for 7 minutes, I think, about our experience of COVID and what that means for powerful communities. I've said the word London, and obviously everyone around the country knows this is what London looks like for all of our communities. That's my charity office, and you may come and visit by booking. No, seriously, not all London is paved with gold. This is our building, just to show you in contrast. This is a derelict old pub that was squatted by social activists in the 70s and converted into our brilliant home, which is The Winch. As Tony said, our mission is to enable every child to succeed regardless of their circumstances. And you may know us not necessarily as The Winch. You may have heard about other services like North Camden Zone at Great Place. Belsize Community Library, which we run as a local asset, and Take Back the Power, which is our youth organising programme for young working class people who wish to advance their own views. And over the last few months, we've been working as part of a wider Camden network responding to COVID. And before I jump into my views, I just want to give a big shout out to all of my brilliant Camden colleagues, some of whom are here and won't forgive me if I don't mention them. I'm not going to mention them all by name, but actually, whilst I'm going to speak, I wanted just to be generous in including all the organisations that have worked really, really terrifically hard over the last few months on responding and supporting to communities best they know well. And I just want to say hi to Camden colleagues from local government and local organisations, many of whom I hope are Locality members. So, big picture. When I was thinking about this speech, I thought, well, what am I going to say to people who've been in the sector for years and probably know as much, if not more than me, about how communities respond? And I wanted to just to kind of share some reflections on where we are. And having lived through a couple of disasters in my lifetime, disasters do overwhelm. They overwhelm in particular large organisations and complex organisations. And in my view, COVID is the worst civilian disaster in living memory. I can't think of another time where we've lost so many people. The death toll from COVID is now 49,000, which is more than was lost at the Battle of Waterloo, more casualties at the Battle of Waterloo, and getting towards the same number of people that died or were injured as a result of the Expeditionary Forces evacuation at Dunkirk, which clearly is on all of our minds as a Remembrance Sunday on the weekend. But first responders to disasters are frequently least coalitions involving local groups, individuals, local government and businesses. And this is why this is the power of distributed leadership and community power in action. And COVID-19, I think, as Tony has said, demonstrates the value of social purposes organisations and working together for a common cause. But as Tony also said, disasters tend to magnify existing fault lines and they precipitate further crises. So I want to take this opportunity to help us and to reflect on what we can do next, to be ready for ourselves, because we know that there are three populations that are being affected most by this pandemic, as well as other things. So there were those communities and individuals that were already facing disproportionate disadvantage or have been made vulnerable by decisions made by government or by society and need support. There were those people who've become vulnerable as a direct result of the disaster. In this instance, we know social isolation is accentuated for a number of families. We know that for disabled children and families with children with additional needs, it's been terrible, and for people in care homes too. A big campaign from Alzheimer's Society around this. And there are some people that, if we're not careful, will be made vulnerable by what we choose to do next in terms of our recovery strategy. Because there are more disasters on the way. We know that COVID-19 will pass, but behind that there is Brexit and the recession and the ultimate catastrophe of climate change. And to be built for this now is also to be thinking about how we need to be built for the future. And not all disasters look the same. Not all disasters are acute crises. Some of them are chronic, they linger. And the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd over the summer really brought this to mind for a number of people who perhaps weren't paying the attention that they ought to have done. And for some of us who've been campaigning on these issues for years, that racism is a pandemic too. It's a slow, creeping pandemic that affects communities disproportionately. So what's worked well? Well, we know, I'm sure you've seen this in your communities, that empowered local leaders responding and adapting to the virus and shaping services, reshaping services, thinking about how best to support those communities that they need help. What I've called minimal viable bureaucracy. We've managed to dismantle the apparatus of mistrust that's crept in between partners, including between funders and charities and local government and charities who ostensibly are on the same team. We're working towards, a lot of time, we're working to the same mission, but we've settled into fixed-term transaction for services relationships, and that needs to be undone permanently. We've seen a number of foundations shifting towards core costs to trust the organisations that they back, and long may that continue. We've seen a number of broad coalitions coming together. I think Marcus Rashford has been absolutely brilliant in the way in which he's cut through on the free school meals message. He's brought lived experience and a wide range of people to campaign off the back of people who've been doing that work for years. And as a result, that coalition around poverty has broadened and included. And it's been amazing to see the local chippy, the cafes chipping in over the free school meal holidays, And that's the support that we need to build on going forward. We need better stories, guys, colleagues. The same storm, different boat narrative has simplified complex issues really, really well. And it's helped people to recognise long-standing structural inequalities, but we haven't always been brilliant at cutting through. And again, the Marcus Rashford story shows what can be done when you can get cut through. We've done a lot of digital adaptation. Some digital developments accelerated, and we've seen the capacity to convene communities. We threw a meeting together last week to bring together people to talk about lockdown 2, and it took us 24 hours to get 39 people in the room. Previously, that would have taken weeks of negotiating the best time to get everyone there. So there have been some great advantages, and it's also revealed the requirement for human relationships and how important they are, and the shared assets and shared space. And certainly, as Tony mentioned, we've had better national coordination and support offer between and from membership organisations. What's not worked so well? I can't list the amount of things national government has done disappointingly, I think, at this stage, but certainly I've highlighted 3. As we all know in our own organisations, if leadership teams don't walk the talk, you get cognitive dissonance, and that breeds mistrust. And the cognitive dissonance of saying do as I say, not what I do, has accentuated trust. There's been a hoarding of power, centralisation, and piecemeal response to, and government has shown that it's stuck on big solutions. The whole Good Sam's app showed that actually that the government still is fixated on big tech, big solutions. And if you campaign on the basis of fostering division, it's really difficult then to build trust quickly. The disproportionate impact of COVID has not met with an equal response. There are still communities that are left behind. And never more needed funding campaign has still not delivered investment, and we need to back that campaign further, particularly during the second wave. I don't think we've been smart on digital due diligence. We are creating common assets, community assets on private platforms, and we haven't interrogated that fully. And sometimes the communities that we're building our common assets are working against our interests. Those platforms that harbour hate and hate speech and hate groups won't help us build community cohesion, and there needs to be a better dialogue and contestation of that space. And we sometimes have not shifted public opinion on what charities social enterprises are for. And as Tony mentioned, as the funding dries up and the crisis turns from an acute crisis to a chronic crisis, there's a risk that we revert to type and start competing for smaller pockets of money. But there are other ways, and I want to tell you some things that we can learn from. So first of all, normal's not okay. We know that the normal was not brilliant for everybody, but managing change is difficult too. And the desire to return to normal, business as usual, is sometimes a reflection of our own tolerance of the distress that we're currently experiencing. But if we rush to solutions without thinking about how we build back better, how we build inclusive responses, we will compound trauma and re-alienate the communities for whom normal wasn't working. We know that disaster to some is opportunities to other. Hurricane Katrina saw the mass clearance of neighbourhoods and estates that were gentrified, ownership was transferred into private hands, and what was built back was worse. Brad Pitt led a very briefly as a side, led a foundation called the Make It Right Foundation. I'd advise you to go and look at that. It's a classic case study of what didn't go right in terms of building back better. We've got to dig in for the long haul. Hillsborough families fought for 30 years. Grenfell survivors are still fighting 3 years on. Justice needs to be central to our response, and we need long-term thinking. Because austerity, or a new wave of austerity, is around the corner, and we need to take this opportunity to champion the need for sustained investment in our social ecosystem and infrastructure. And we need to lead a community-led recovery, which means that we've got to think about how we work with our communities in year 12. And we haven't fully, I think, as a country, acknowledged the loss. As I said, 49,000. It's really easy to glib over those statistics. And as someone that's lost a fair number of people in my extended family as a result of COVID, because Asian families are particularly vulnerable to this, as well as Black and other racialized minority groups, COVID is still a disaster that's affecting bereaved individuals and communities. And we haven't found the rituals and mechanisms as a country to acknowledge that yet. And we must find ways to memorialize the pandemic coming forward. And through that process, just as we did with the First and Second World War, to create a new framework of shared values. And we need to take this opportunity to engage more people in our mission. As I said, the Rashid campaign has shown that people do care about inequality when they can see how it affects their communities, and they do understand, when it's presented correctly, why equality is good for everyone. And I think our mission over the next 5 to 10 years is to engage those communities further so that they can understand how they can help win small to ultimately win big. And on that note, we have to defeat hunger and hardship together. That doesn't mean we all need to open food banks. There are many, many organisations that are brilliant at this role and have done the hard yards in preparing and working on distributing food. But we do need alternatives, complementary services and supportive relationships around the food bank to tackle the hardship as well as the hunger. And the bigger prize is to move to a world where we don't need food banks. And I guess my personal thing is that community-led recovery strategies need to build on collective efficacy, which is when we work together from in solidarity with each other, and by brokering agency for people who are most affected. And we build that around our common experiences. So we've seen from the American election campaign that there are still 70 million people who wanted Trump to win and 75 million. That's a bitterly divided country. The work has to begin to bring that country together. And we thought through Brexit ourselves that those divisions still stand. So we need to find ways of rebuilding trust with intention. And that means figuring out ways to build reciprocal relationships and to maximize everyday interactions where people can get off social media and begin to encourage humans in their lived habitat and to rebuild trust in a very human way. And finally, whatever we do, our social infrastructure, our social ecosystem needs to be regenerative, not extractive. It needs to contribute to and create social value in the local ecosystem so that we enable local places to thrive. And that means that we all have to think about how we act in the ecosystem, how we support and steward that ecosystem, and what our specific role is, and how we can support others to take forward that role. And I just want to finally end on this slide, which is about, you may have seen it already. We cannot show this slide often enough, about how do we build back better in a just way. Yeah, and we have to begin to think about, in the community sector, how we share the resources and assets that the community sector has. For too long in this sector, Black and racialized minority groups have not had a stake in many of the core assets we own. When assets are transferred into community hands, we have to ask ourselves, who owns the assets? Are we making space at the table? Are we creating a bigger table so that more people can enjoy and exercise agency and have power with those assets? And that's something that we need to consider as a sector, because we haven't been brilliant at it, ourselves included, and we need to be better. And this is our challenge if we want to build a just society, a society where the causes of inequity are addressed. Then we need to remove the systemic barriers in our own sector as well as externally. Thank you. I think that's my time.
Thank you, Rashid, for that really thoughtful and inspiring talk. I think there's a lot of challenge in there, and I think you're absolutely right that we as a sector need to do more around that justice point you were just making. So thank you for your contribution, and there'll be a chance for people to ask questions, and you'll be joining the panel alongside our other speaker. So thank you. Our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Linda. And Linda is a fantastic person. Linda Hines' interest in community work and volunteering started in 1989 when she discovered that her home was one of over 900 scheduled for demolition. So she became a director of the Witton Lodge Community Association in 1996 and has since founded and led Perry Common Community Watch, the Ring of Sound Choir and the Duckling Watch. Linda is also chair of Friends of Witton Lakes. She's driven by her passion for encouraging residents to get involved and feel the benefit of making a difference themselves. And I'm sure she's going to give us a really great talk. Welcome, Linda. Linda's slides are just going to come up.
morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I wish it could be face to face, but it's wonderful that the unconvention can happen. So Rashid kindly was my wingman and told about that we needed some stories. So I'm going to tell you the story. Perry Common was built by Birmingham City Council in the 1920s. And my family and myself moved here in 1977. On a cold November morning, a letter arrived to over 900 homes, including my own, telling us that our homes were going to be demolished. A residents' association was formed overnight, almost, which I wasn't initially a part of. I'd never done anything in the community before and was painfully shy, which people won't believe now, but I was. And I eventually joined the Residents' Association because I wanted to know what was going to happen to my family and my home. An idea was brought to the Residents' Association of setting up a community association where residents would be in the lead. Now, how sceptical were we that we were just a tick box? Because there's only one letter in between resident-led and residents-led. And I have to probably admit that we were residents-led in the first place when we set up Witton Lodge Community Association, because not many of the resident directors, who were in the majority on the board, were experienced in any form of redevelopment. We learnt really quickly. Witton Lodge was formed as an organisation in 1994. And I remembering that I was painfully shy, I sat there at many meetings and actually said nothing, and didn't really understand what was going on. But I remember vividly the first time that I actually put my hand up and said something. Here's the story. I was sitting we were in a meeting of about 20 people, sitting in a circle. And sitting next to me was a solicitor that I had never seen before. He produced a 60-page document and said that we were going to discuss. And he said, I haven't printed any of these off for the resident directors because they won't understand. My hand went in the air immediately. And I said, well, I may not understand, but I've got a voice and I'll ask a question. So therefore, and that I came out of that meeting thinking, my goodness, that was either very brave of me or very foolish. I think it was brave for me then. For the next 15 years, we worked on the physical redevelopment, building almost 200 homes. But we also changed the road layout because it wasn't right for the amount of traffic that had increased. We fought the planners on lots of things. Sometimes we lost, but the wins were brilliant. They really were. And as residents and as local residents, we celebrated every single thing we did, whether that was winning over the planners, that we got the colour bricks we wanted as opposed to what they wanted us to have. Because it's got to be fun, because you work so hard. But the bricks and mortar was the easy part, really. Building back the community spirit, losing 2/3 of the community when those 900 homes were demolished, was much harder. So we recruited a staff team to deliver our Flourishing Communities programme, which includes employment, skills and training, the environment, and health and well-being. Another story. June and John were referred to our health and well-being team. as clients who were really struggling. We worked with them, I say, not to them. We worked with them, and they gained in confidence, and within 12 months, they were our advocates delivering services to other wellbeing clients. Now that's the real success story. That may tick a box, but it ticks something much bigger than that. And actually, that's why you do it. And it's the how and the why. And not be afraid to say, no, we're not doing something because it doesn't feel right and doesn't fit with our values. We were starting at that point to be recognised as a community anchor. I didn't probably know what one was by then, but I soon learned. If you fast forward to earlier this year when the pandemic hit, as an association, we weren't really sure of how things were going to pan out, but we know that we would be here for our community and that we would not close our doors. We set up 2 COVID response task forces, one with local partners, as in Perry Common and the surrounding neighbourhoods, but also in the Erdington constituency. And those partnerships, we'd got partnerships with them before, most of them, but this seemed to cement that relationship with nobody having to be in the lead, but delivering much, much more because we were doing it together and with people. The amount of, I can still remember the amount of volunteers that came forward, and the caring was just overwhelming, really. And we've still linked with those volunteers now, even after the first lockdown was eased. As for the future, we know that the economic fallout will be immense. So to prepare, we developed the North Birmingham Economic Summit with some big players. So HS2 are there, and Peddymore, and IM Properties City Council. But regarding community-led solutions, which is what we advocate and is in our DNA and is through us through and through, we're also founding members of West Midlands Urban Community Homes, which is a relatively new community benefit society, and encouraging more and more developers and house builders to realise that community-led housing works wonders, and actually you don't have the problems after the build and the new people have moved in. Finally, we spend our lives reacting and responding to crises. So let's shape the future together.
Would help if I unmuted. Thank you, Linda, for that really inspiring talk. Great to have you with us. So there's going to be a chance to ask some questions of our 2 panelists, or for me as well. So if you just go underneath the video feed, you will see the button to ask questions. So do get your questions in if you want to ask anything now in this main session. We've also got then after this session some more specific Q&As. So we have exclusive VIP rooms where Linda will be transported to one, Rashid will be transported to another, and I will be transported to another one alongside Mark, our chair. So you can choose which of us you would like to ask more in-depth questions on, and we can have more of a discussion and a chat to make it a bit more interactive. Just a reminder also, I know a few people have been asking, all these talks that we've been having this morning, you can watch again and again as much as you like on the platform. Things are going to be available on the platform for 6 months, so plenty of time to watch your favourites. So do we have any questions? I just need to look at a different screen while I'm doing it, and our panelists are here. So we have a Question here, a great point about the need to cut through with better stories, learning from the Marcus Rashford campaign. Rashid, you were talking about this. Would be interested in thoughts on what the bigger community story might be. So, Rashid, do you want to take that one? Just elaborate a little bit on what you started talking about.
Thank you. I'm not a comms expert, and people who are very kind have sat through my long rambling talks for many, many years without necessarily echoing back that Rashid, cut it down, keep it more simple. My trustees do tell me that occasionally. So I'm not a comms expert, but there is something really amazing about what that young 23-year-old man has done for children all over the country that I'm just in awe of, and I know that he's done that work off the back of a lot of heavy lifting from other charities and organisations that have been doing this work for years. And the reason why I respect Marcus Rashford so much is because he's been inclusive in that praise. He's been generous in his leadership, and he's recognised the work that youth clubs contributions made, the contributions youth club made to his life, and the support that his mum got, and he's continued to do that. So I think there's a generous leadership that he embodies, which I'd love to see spread more further in the sector. And of course, he's just brought Burberry on to invest in some very small local youth clubs, around 15 of them across the country. So that's also great that he's bringing in the private sector. But I do recognise that one of the things that we're not so good at in this sector is speaking to the general public both about the essential civic value of charities, social organisations, social purpose organisations, and how they're the white blood cells of the human body. They protect, inculcate, and support the healthiness of democracy. And now more than ever, that's really, really clear. And secondly, about how we mobilise people who generally want to see a better world in our missions to effect change. And I think sometimes because of the way in which we work, we have built hard boundaried organisations, and we have to find ways of making them more porous so that we can connect across sectors and across communities to get people working together on issues of equality and fairness. We haven't really sold the story of equality. We know that economists have said for years that rising wealth lifts all boats, and we've known for years that's not true. Because we can see the evidence with our own eyes that communities, particularly communities that are already disadvantaged by societies, are continually left behind. They've always asked to wait their turn for the dividend, and when it comes, it's very, very, very small, if at all. But what we do know is that those countries that are more equal have better outcomes for children, have better outcomes for families, have better outcomes as a community, for communities. And so we need to find ways to communicate that a rising tide of equality is good for everyone, rather than fall into the divisiveness that's been inculcated in this country of blaming others for taking what little share we have of whatever's left when the very, very wealthy or the very powerful pass on what's ours. So I'm all for listening. Some of that will be about personal stories, and I think Marcus Rashford's personal story plays a large part in this. Some of that's about his authenticity and the platform he can bring to accentuate and amplify this story. But we know celebrities aren't always the answer, so as I mentioned with the Brad Pitt example in Hurricane Katrina. But I'd love to have a collective effort across all of our membership organisations and across charities about telling the story of what we do much better.
I think that's right. I think very much the personal story. We all know that we get engaged by personal stories, don't we? I mean, it's obvious from all of our lives. We're engaged when we hear about someone's own journey, and so we need to be better as a sector, as an organisation, as a network about telling that personal story. We are doing some work on this at Locality to really tell the story of community organisations from the point of view of people who live in the area. And just building on that, Linda, there's a question here. What has helped you to grow in confidence so that you could remain involved and go on to lead in your community? Because you talked about your personal story, which was really powerful. So the question was just saying that they'd love to know how to better to support their board. So what lessons do you think you've got and what experience do you have?
I think I think small wins made me more confident. I have to pinch myself every day to know that I lead the board, because I still don't quite believe it. I think when you get feedback from people you tried to help, however small that is, and sometimes the smaller feedback is the better, the difference you can make with people by helping people, but working with them. So it's been a gradual thing for me to gain that confidence. I love what I do. It's a job I could never have imagined that I would be part of. And I suppose it's a great privilege to be part of it. I've got a wonderful board and a wonderful staff team. It was all new to me. I'd never had staff. I'd never line managed. And so I would say the learning a little about a lot, rather than a lot about a little. So I'm really good at quizzes, because if it's not a specialist subject. And so I think having fun, I've grown more cheeky as I've got more confident, and Tony will know that. Because you can get away with murder, because I'm not a paid director, and I think that's a great power to be used wisely. And so I'm really cheeky with people that don't expect me to be, but in a nice way, and get my point across. And so, but I think I haven't finished my journey. I think I'm learning all the time, and look forward to whatever life throws at us, and coming up with those community-led solutions.
Thanks, Linda. So we've got a couple of minutes for another couple of questions. So we have a question coming up, which a lot of people have liked, for Rashid, about the alternative around private digital platforms, which is a really good point. But what I'm going to suggest we do, Rashid, just because of time, is that you answer that question in your VIP room in the Q&A session after this, if that's okay. There are a couple of questions that are relatively similar about empowering, supporting local communities and engaging with local communities. So I guess a simple question: what's the best way to get the community involved? And linked to that, is there anything the council could do? So maybe just a quick response from both of you on that one. So how do we get local communities engaged and involved, and what's the role of the local council?
Well, I'm going to say two things really. It's all about the relationships, and it's something that I'm learning, as Linda was mentioning. You know, I think we have to keep learning, and I think as you get older, if you've forgotten that learning is fun and important and inspiring, curiosity is a chief executive's greatest weapon. Yeah, and I think for me, the thing that I'm most curious about is how do we reorientate the way we work to a more relational way of working? What does that look and feel like? So it is about relationships, and secondly, it's about why would the community want to get involved with you? Why aren't you involved with the community? You know, we have to go to where the community is, and we have to find ways of lowering those structural and systemic inequalities to enable people to be involved. I mentioned very briefly Take Back the Power. We employ 10 youth organisers with lived experience, I hate that, but with experience of youth violence. They're young, black, working class young people, and we pay them London living wage by way of enabling them to be involved. We train them because now they can't fully inhabit their roles, and so we have to experiment with those solutions. We have to find ways of ensuring that people who are otherwise not able to be involved because of issues beyond their control, and accelerate that process. We've got so much work to do and so little time to do it to get there.
Thanks, Rashid. And Linda?
I think when Witton Lodge was first formed, we tried to engage with the community in the wrong way, because sometimes you have to do something wrong to learn from it. And now, I think the best way to engage with the communities as individuals, because we're all different. So it's finding out what individuals, what makes them tick, what gives them a buzz, what their passion is, and not trying to fit them into a role you want the community to play. The local authority, we have a very good relationship with Birmingham City Council. They have 2 places on our board. And I suppose it's respected as equals. Sometimes it takes a time for local authorities to respect community organisations as equals, but you have to prove yourself, and that's fine. But they have to prove themselves too to be at that table. So I just think it's a slow burner, and it may never happen, but I think you'll get there in the end.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks, Rashid. So, unfortunately, this is going to be a constant theme, I think, over the next 2 days. We haven't had time to go through all of the questions. However, we fully anticipated that. So that's the opportunity to now go into the separate Zoom rooms to